Hello, team. Welcome to this session. So we are going to look at simply what a business organization is, and then the different types of business organizations whilst we do some simple cross analysis and find out how best we can identify one organization from the other using some factors, some metrics, some considerations, right? So let's delve deep into the lesson and see how best we can cover some grounds. Okay. So what is the what are we going to look at over here, right? So in essence, we're looking at what a definition of a business organization is. Like I said, we look at some examples and how to differentiate one organization from the other. Okay. And then what factors will cause us to see one organization different from the other? We look at the typical UK legal regime systems and companies that fall within the UK regime and the advantages and disadvantages, and how to also differentiate a public sector organization from a private sector. Organizations are simply social arrangements organized or set up with the aim of controlling some performance to achieve a collective goal. So examples like the Big Four audit firm, KPMG, a multinational organization like Ford, a charity organization like Oxfam, and then a local authority like Renfrewshire Council are all examples. Let's look at their common characteristics. Most organizations are preoccupied with performance. They do something at a certain time for a particular reason, okay? They don't just sit down idly. There are documented processes, systems, and standard operating procedures that govern these organizations. Like I said, individuals do something at a certain time. They pursue a variety of objectives and goals. They have a short-term vision, which is achievable and measurable within a very short term, 1 to 2 years. Okay, and then they have a strategy, a vision that guides performance in the long run to ensure they continue surviving as a going concern. Most organizations will obtain input materials and process them into output using activities, right? Now, how do organizations differ? 8 factors help to differentiate one organization from the other. The ownership structure, whether it is a private or public, the ownership structure will tell us, is it owned by the government or by individual shareholders? The control pattern, okay? If it is directly owned by the directors, by the owners who control the resources, okay, and also determine what to do with their returns, their profits, okay? But if it is indirectly controlled by government regulators or agencies, it tells us the kind of organization that we have. The activity that they engage in, we have the primary sector, which deals with raw materials, the secondary sector, which will convert the primary sector outputs into primary sector inputs into output. So they leverage on the primary sector. So the output from the primary sector becomes their input for the secondary sector. And the tertiary sector is usually the service sector. There is a fourth sector which has been categorized, and it is usually looking at the social economy, look at the charities, the NGOs, the IGOs, okay. Also, we're looking at the profit orientation can tell us where to classify this organization. So if it is a classical market type economy firm, which looks at only profit maximization for shareholders, where do we classify them? But if it is a social economy type, which operates not for profit, where do we classify them? The legal status will also tell whether it is a sole proprietor, whether it is a company limited by partnership, a company limited by shares, a company limited by guarantees, or whether it is a club or an association or a cooperative or a government department or agency. The legal status will determine how to classify them. And then the size of the firm will tell, is it a micro, small, medium, or large? Okay. So, and then the last two, the sources of funding or finance. Private sector, how do we fund them? From owners' capital, from loans, from government funding, okay? They can also plow back their profits to support or fund their organizations or their operations. The public sector, they are looking at the taxes, getting some subsidies from the government. They can also borrow from the public to support the organizations, and also if they receive some fees or they levy some penalties in order to survive, all right? And then technology would also tell how to classify them. Organizations that are high or rich in the use of technologies, and those who are less in using technologies. Consider a barbering shop. How much technology do they employ in their activities? Consider a university like UWS. How much technology do we need in order to survive? Okay. Now, a private sector company is privately owned, could be owned by individuals, groups, or by a conglomerate of companies. Okay. Now, they work to survive or they operate to make profit. If they don't make profit, difficult for them to survive. So large organizations, private organizations are usually quoted on the stock exchange. So when you see PLC, okay, publicly limited companies, okay, or LTD, so these will tell you where to classify them. The PLCs are listed on the stock market. The LTDs are not listed. And most private sector organizations are regulated by laws and regulations both at the local, national, and at the global level. Private sectors, they differ somehow from the public sector, but they also tend to offer similar services as a public sector. So take example like British Gas, okay? Sometimes you realize, you ask yourself, is it a public or a private firm, okay? Some hospitals, you can get private hospitals, you can get private schools, okay? But they all provide the same curriculum as a private or the public as a public organization will provide, okay? Same quality healthcare as the NHS will provide if you are attending a private hospital, okay? Sole tradership is sole proprietorship or sole trader is one type of an organization owned and run by one person. He's liable for all the risk and rewards of the organization. He raises funds using his own personal income. Of course, he can go for a loan from other people, and all profits goes to him and all losses he will bear it, okay? The business is not separate from the owner. They are considered as one, okay? So ask yourself, what do you think are the advantages of and disadvantages of being a sole trader on your own, in your own time? Partnerships, they are usually registered, where you see two or more people come together with the same aim. Let us form a legal firm. Let us form an accountancy firm, okay? And they are also, each partner has an unlimited liability, which allows creditors to sue some or all of the partners to pay a debt. They are, of course, being regulated, and there are partnership codes that guide them to ensure that they operate within the interest of the partnership. Each partner will contribute a capital so that the business will survive. Sometimes people don't contribute capital, but they contribute their skill to the partnership, and it is also considered as part of their contribution. Like I said, legal documents are available to ensure that they operate within the Partnership Act. Okay. Partnerships, they are likely to have written, set out, lay down procedures to ensure we all work so that we will achieve a purpose. Sometimes you see partners sleeping around, they are dormant. Some books will say they are dormant partners. Others will say they are sleeping partners, whereas we also have active partners. And like I said, the Partnership Act of 1890 helps to ensure that the provisions of partnerships are observed in the running of the organization. And most audit firms are partnership. They are limited by partnerships. And then the legal fraternity as well. Okay. So ask yourself this question on your own: what are the advantages you foresee when you're trying to compare a partnership to a sole trader? And what are the possible disadvantages of a partnership, and how would you like to resolve it on your own? Companies which are limited by shares, by guarantee, okay. So businesses usually will have separate legal entities from their owners. So the business is liable, the company is liable for any risk and rewards than the owners who are contributing their shares. So the liability is restricted to the share capital. That's why we call it a limited liability. All right. So if there's any loss to the company, I will only be limited according to the amount of share that I have contributed. So my shares will be used to clear off the liability. Okay. Shares, personal shareholders, their personal assets cannot be used to defray any company debt. They only use the portion of the shares that have contributed. And of course, we need to register with the Registrar of Companies, have a memorandum of association and an article of association that will guide the organization. And of course, most companies must operate within the company's code, because the company's code guides proper behavior and ensure that adequate corporate governance practices are adhered to. Private limited companies, the LTDs, they cannot raise shares from the stock market, from the public. It is only the PLCs, the public limited ones, who can do so on the stock market. All right. What are the advantages of this type of company? Okay. And try to search online to find some examples of LTDs. Try to see if you can also find examples of PLCs, right? Let's compare a PLC to an LTD. And let's use these factors. In terms of the number of shareholdings, PLCs have large numbers. Then they normally have their shareholders from the investing public, whereas LTDs have smaller number of shareholders. In terms of transferability of shares, PLCs can be offered. They can easily transfer their shares to the general public by using the stock market, okay? Whereas the LTDs cannot transfer without the consent of the existing shareholders. In terms of the number of directors, you will see the PLCs, they normally have less likely to hold shares, these directors, but directors are also seen as stewards. But things have changed recently where directors are put on share-based schemes to ensure they also try to behave like shareholders and also work in the interest of the company. But for LTDs, they will most likely be the main shareholder, so the owner becomes a director. Source of funding, like I said, PLCs can raise it on the stock market, whereas the LTD existing shareholders will have to invest or call for investment angels to come and help support their work. There's also another type of business which is called a co-ops. Okay, a cooperative is simply an organization owned and controlled equally by the people who use its services or who work at it. All right. So the co-op, stock of John Lewis, is a co-op retail, right? And usually one member, one vote, irrespective of your shareholding. And these co-ops are owned by workers. They elect their management and they divide the profits among themselves at the end of the period. Why are co-ops a great way to run businesses? Look at this YouTube channel, which is slotted in the slides, and you will see why co-ops are a great way to run a business. There is another one, mutual associations. They operate similar to the co-ops, but they are owned by their investors, controlled by members. Examples like credit union and some building societies like Halifax, that used to be mutual associations, have now been converted to banks. And Halifax is a great example, as well as AiB National, right? So again, this question, compare and contrast the class discussions with this YouTube channel, okay? So the previous discussions we've looked at, try and look at this YouTube channel and try to draw some similarities and differences. Have you heard of a credit union? What services do they offer, right? Try, go through and find this. Now, this is just a good advice to you. Most students pass through the system. Don't do that. Please, the good way to build your career and to network and to prepare yourself for the job market is to try to volunteer your services at some of these charities and credit unions and even the profit-making organizations, okay? And it helps you to build some skills, some competencies, so that when you get yourself out there, you will be highly competitive, okay? It separates the boys from the men, separates the women from the girls. Please, don't just pass through the system, especially those of us who are not fully engaged. Find some part-time, okay, some internships, and then volunteer your services. Franchising is also a common word that is normally used, and it refers to the method of using another person's business name. It is usually dominant within the fast food services, okay? So what happens is that the franchisor will give me the independent right to use his name, his techniques, his processes to run my business. At the end of the day, I pay him a percentage of my gross monthly sales, or I pay him a royalty. McDonald's is a clear example. KFC is a clear example. At the end of the day, pay them something. Use their names, use their trademarks, use their business systems. If you need any help, contact the head office, and the head office will provide you with advice on how to run your businesses, okay? So like I said, typical of fast foods, car hiring, printing, but they are all self-employed franchisees. So if I have my money, I get a good land, I want to put up a fast food joint, I can name it KFC, just use the trade name, pay them some royalties, and then you survive as a going concern. Once the contract has expired, I need to always renegotiate with the head office or the owner of the trademark. Else, I need to stop using the name. Okay, so quite some examples that we can find in the UK: Subway, KFC, McDonald's, name them, right? Go through this website, you can find top UK franchises in the UK over the past, or some are existing, right, which you can work through it. Again, we also have another type of organization called the multinational companies. They are normally having their headquarters in one country, but they operate in many other countries. They often have two-tier management, the strategic and then the operational. So the strategic, normally based at the head office, they put in the structures, the hierarchy, the plans, and then at the operational level, they implement it locally. So they normally have considerable economic power. Talk of BP, okay? And then we also have another type of organization, which is the not-for-profit. Like the name sounds, they do not operate for profits. So examples include the charities, animal welfare, hospitals, research, government department. UWS is a charity organization. You can always find it at the base with our unique charity registration number, okay? Objectives will always include a mix of political, educational, social, environmental, and economic issues. So they have quite sometimes diverse objectives which they need to meet, often concerned with maximizing flow of funds to give best value for customers. So we normally say value for money, okay? So as you are in UWS, you're getting value for money. And we also have the public sector, which we can differentiate it from the private sector, okay? Public sector organizations are wholly or partially owned by the national or local government or authority, other than publicly owned body, okay? And they provide services, okay? We know them, water services, cleaning services, janitorial services. They are regulated by strict rules, often on a legal basis. Government departments, like the name sounds, they are not in to make profits. They do not prepare profit and loss accounts. You normally see them preparing income and expenditure. So they will rather report a deficit or a surplus, right? So they are not required to make profits, but they need to at least get some income to survive. A typical example, BBC. Look at BBC. They survive on our TV licenses to operate, right? So take examples of public sector, NHS, police, state schools, DVLA, and they could have some mixed history, okay? So there used to be this Northern Rock and RBS. They used to be privately owned, but have now become nationalized. Railway systems, gone were the days, but they have been nationalized after World War II, okay, into British Rail, ScotRail, you know them. So public sector is owned and operated by the government. It works differently in different ways from the private sector. Let's try to wrap up with the public sector. Again, they tend to provide services and they normally tend to have monopoly over it, ScotRail, all right. And so they have a responsibility for that service. They could be bureaucratic, they could be large, they could follow some formalities. Sometimes it could be boring, but it is for the interest of the system. Governments, they are usually governed by strict rules and procedures, and they are within the confines of the law for which they operate. Let's look at some interesting points between public and private. Public schools are in fact private schools. Why? Look at Rose Hall Hospital. It's a private hospital. It's an example, but you realize they both perform the same services, using the same curriculum, writing the same A level, and then the national exams. So private sector organizations that make money and therefore pay taxes, that pay for organizations in the public sector. Private sector will operate, make income, make profit, and then they use part of the profit to fund the public sector. So it's a two-way affair. Take this and use it to help that, right? And so they can also come together through joint finance schemes. You can always see public-private partnerships, and then you can see private finance initiatives where the two work hand in hand to support the system. Private organizations, like we said, to survive as a going concern, they need to make profits. Public organizations, they normally get their funding from government with conditions and terms attached, so they must operate within those conditions, all right? So examples, gas, electricity, and then we can ask ourselves, in the past, sometime around 1979, several public organizations have been privatized. Why? It is believed that once they got privatized, processes became efficient and they were able to work to provide value for the system and to also remain as a competitive organization. So make sure public organizations, they do not run at a loss. Usually it is advised, okay, if they have to run at a loss, then it means the government must pump in some more money subsidies to support them. Public organizations sometimes will end up running at a loss and they will have to recoup some of their running costs. You see them reporting deficit, it's not a good sign, okay? They rarely operate to make profit, but nowadays you see them having that hidden notion that let us survive by getting some surplus, okay? So private companies are funded by shareholders. They could take bank loans, profits could be plowed back or retained to survive. Public companies, no, we can only survive using grants, government budgets, not profits, not loans. But of course, we've seen in recent times where public organizations going for bank loans to survive. And of course, they normally are able to pay back because of the viability of the activities that they run. Development, formation of partnership, ask yourself, how can I convert my sole proprietorship to a partnership? If such a question is asked, what are the development processes you go through? What are the processes you go through if you have to do a PFI or a PPP, public-private partnership or private-public partnerships, okay? And then how does the process work to ensure there's value for money, there's income, there's survival prospects for the organization, and to ensure that the company survives as a going concern. Basically, the private company will build new schools or hospitals at its cost, but then they rent the building to the local authority. We see it around. So they give it to the local authority and charge a little commission to also survive. And it helps. Is it a good idea? It is. It is a good idea because it's a way of helping the community at a lower cost. Perhaps they will rent it at a lower cost and still make some good money to survive as a going concern. So with this, we are able to now understand how a private sector is different from a public sector and how they both work with the aim of bringing good to the public, for the public good. So both ways are good, and we cannot survive in our system now without a public sector, without a private sector. They both help us, okay? And if organization, a public sector is not working well, it is ideal that it should be privatized with the aim of improving efficiencies, removing wastages, economy of skills, and also effective processes for value for money. Great. See you in the next session. Thank you.